Sorry about that, babe.
Final Fantasy III is a traditional turn-based RPG that was developed and published by Squaresoft, released in Japan for the Famicom on April 27th of 1990. For the purpose of this review, we'll be focusing on a translated version for the regular Nintendo that I purchased complete in box from Flashback Entertainment a few years back. I will link that in the description below. The game starts off with an earthquake that opens up a hidden cavern and altar cave near the village of Four young orphans, under the care of Topapa, the village elder, head off to explore the impact of the earthquake, and while doing so they come across a crystal of light. The crystal radiates power, grants some to the orphans, and instructs them to go forth to restore balance to the world. The orphans return to their adoptive families to inform them that it's time to go off to explore the overworld of the floating continent. I'll let the rest of the story unfold for you from there. Similar in ways to the first entry of the series, the main gimmick of Final Fantasy III revolves around the job system. As you progress deeper into the game, more jobs become unlocked and offer a variety of strategies within picking and choosing your jobs. For the most part, I kept a standard job class setup throughout the game. However, there will be times where changing jobs for, I guess you could say, spot jobs, would be in your best interest in order to succeed. The job list includes the following: Fighter, Monk, White Wizard, Black Wizard, Red Wizard, Hunter, Knight, Thief, Scholar, Geomancer, Dragoon, Viking, Karateka, Mystic Knight, Conjurer, Bard, Summoner, Shaman, Warlock, Sage, and Ninja. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of jobs to choose from, which should help keep the replay value high on subsequent playthroughs. Truth be told, I didn't use nearly half the jobs on my first playthrough. Final Fantasy III returns to form and enhances the series in many aspects. Gone is the convoluted leveling system of Final Fantasy II, instead it is replaced with a more traditional and general experience gain. Final Fantasy III also introduces a series staple of auto-targeting while in battle. So, for example, if you target the enemy, it dies, your next attacking character will then attack a nearby enemy instead of attacking the air like in previous entries. Unfortunately, this does not apply to magical attacks, which does kinda stink. As you could expect with a game in the Final Fantasy series, the music from Nobuo Uematsu still slaps. Many memorable tunes are littered throughout, including a few great ones later on. I feel that the soundtrack in Final Fantasy III is more traditional and not as atmospheric or moody like it was in Final Fantasy II. Not that either is a bad thing, just something to note. The difficulty of Final Fantasy III is definitely toned down, whether it be due to the more easy to understand and achieve leveling system, or just the general lack of status afflicting or insta-kill enemies of that of the previous installment. The game is much easier than its predecessor. That does not mean that this is an easy game though. Unless you're willing to put in the work with your grinding and some processes of trial and error regarding enemy weakness and choosing the correct jobs, this game can be very difficult at times. Which leads me into my next point. There are many dungeons in Final Fantasy III that revolve around gimmicks. These gimmicks include enemies that can only be killed effectively by certain classes, or you must afflict yourself with a status condition to enter, such as Tiny, and so forth. As such, these dungeons can be a giant thorn in your side. One of my main gripes about this game is the status condition entry ticket. There are way too many instances of needing to be tiny in order to enter dungeons and caves. It's overused in the worst way. At first you're like, oh, this is a pretty cool idea, but then by the third time you have to do this you are completely over it, and in my opinion it is a very lazy design by the devs and it becomes truly tiresome. The graphics of Final Fantasy III are about what you'd expect. Slight improvements across the board from Final Fantasy II, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's anything to write home about. You don't really see the graphical leap until you switch to the Super Famicom/Super NES era with Final Fantasy IV. Overall, Final Fantasy III was a very enjoyable experience. Veering back on course, so to speak, from Final Fantasy II was a much needed move for the series. The story is captivating enough to keep you moving along, the job system keeps you on your toes, and the general challenge of the game is put together well, sans a few certain sections of the game. I give Final Fantasy III on the Famicom/NES an 8 out of 10. Out of the original 3, I would place this as my second favorite entry. I still prefer the first, but I look at Final Fantasy III as the springboard onto bigger and better things in the 16-bit era, and honestly, it still did a damn good job for what it was. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. It would really help out the channel. Take care.